go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ASCII Anything, presented to you by Moser Consulting. I'm your host, Angel Leon, Moser's Director of Personnel. We're glad that you're with us for this episode of ASCII Anything because today we're going to be discussing software development best practices around agile development with one of our own, Jeff Coates. Today, we're diving into one of the most transformative approaches in modern software development, agile. It's more than just a buzzword or a set of rituals. Agile represents a mindset shift that's changed how teams build, collaborate, and deliver value. We'll explore what makes Agile successful, the benefits organizations can expect when it's done right, and what it really takes to lead an Agile transformation from individuals and teams to the entire enterprise. So let's unpack the principles, challenges, and best practices behind becoming truly Agile. Before we do this, let's bring in our guest, Jeff Coates. Jeff, welcome to Ask Anything. How are you?
Good. How are you fellas doing?
Doing excellent. Thank you very much for being with us today. Honestly, we talked Agile in the past, but I don't think we've actually dedicated an episode to Agile. So I'm really looking forward to this.
As am I.
For those who might be new to Agile, how would you describe what Agile really means in practice beyond just sprints and stand-ups?
There are a lot of buzzwords that get thrown around, and I'll be honest, I'm probably going to throw several of them out. First few of them being Agile is a mindset, it's a framework. Those are both true, but I would encourage folks not to get distracted by the buzzwords. By framework, I mean they're bumper rails to allow folks to kind of navigate the software development and project management process without veering too far one way or another. They're guideposts and provide some milestones for regular check-ins with a project stakeholders or potential customers or other folks in your company to see if a project or a software solution or a product is on track and actually solving the problems we want it to solve, or if we're just spiraling down a rabbit hole in an uncontrolled manner. Kind of in the past, folks had used what's called waterfall, where folks would spend, depending on the size of the product being built or the size of the project, days, weeks, months, sometimes years, just gathering requirements, then spending days, weeks, months, years doing development, and then days, weeks, months, years doing testing. Then they get at the end of those several days, several weeks, several years to find out things have changed, and this solution that's been built over this long period of time doesn't solve our problem. So Agile helps address that through iteration, primarily. Within the Agile framework, you work with stakeholders, work with the development team, work with designers, work with testers in a discrete period of time called a sprint. Often it's 2 weeks, can be shorter, can be longer, but the goal is at the end of 2 weeks, you get to show off what you've done, present it to your stakeholders, and get a thumbs up, thumbs down, right track, wrong track feedback. Again, the goal being avoiding the pitfall of being 2, 3, 5 months or years down the road and find out, oh boy, geez, our situation's changed and what's been built doesn't address our problem. Instead, the cost of failure is greatly reduced. If we do a 2-week development sprint, we put it in front of stakeholders, and it's a swing and a miss, you've lost 2 weeks. At that point, you can pivot, and you should pivot without mercy. If that sprint demo or however you present the 2-week sprints output to your stakeholders, if it's a swing and a miss and it just didn't work, stop, reevaluate, gather that feedback, take that back to your development team and say, okay, we swung and missed, let's learn from that, and we need to go in a different direction.
So I guess that's one of the differences, right? From waterfall to I would call the modern iteration of Agile, because that's some of those things we discussed in some previous episodes, I think in season 1 and season 2, of just how Agile has sort of transformed from being that waterfall model where everything just took longer and there was no set time in stone, if you will, like with the sprints where you are sort of like what sprint means. You're on a race, you're trying to race against the clock. You're trying to do as much as you can as quickly as possible, but obviously in an effective and efficient manner, correct?
Correct. But I think the big part of it is with a sprint, and I'll just use 2 weeks because that's what I've used most of the time in my examples. In that 2 weeks, you're working with your sprint team, with your scrum team on an agreed amount of work. What can we as a team agree that we can accomplish in 2 weeks, and we're not going to do anything else? So it limits the scope of what the team is working on at that time, but it limits the risk too. There's not days, weeks, months, years of work that are stacked on our plate. It's just 2 weeks. And again, it's about reducing that cost of failure. If after 2 weeks we miss the mark, we've only missed 2 weeks of it instead of 2 years of it.
Right. And you're mostly working in stages, as you described. So basically, you're not really taking on the whole project at one time in 2 weeks. You're just basically dividing that project up in 2 week increments, if you will. And basically, you're just going at it 2 weeks. Here's what we're going to focus on. Like you said, here's the shared workload. Here's what we're going to focus on. Let's attack it, and let's meet in the end of that 2 weeks and see where we fall or where we succeeded, and then move on to the next phase if we can.
Absolutely. So kind of like a step above the 2 week sprint. A sprint is an iteration. And by that I mean, where does a product owner and with the input from the stakeholders decide, well, yeah, we have these 2 week sprints, but what are the list of features that have been developed in 1, 2, 3, 4, however many sprints? At one point, will we have enough done to where we can go beyond just doing a sprint demo? We can get this out in front of actual users, an MVP, or maybe subsets of an MVP where maybe you're not releasing a product out to the public, but you've got enough done to show the CEO, to show something off to your chief technology officer, your CIO, demonstrate how much work has been accomplished and see how useful it is. But then, yeah, you get to that MVP level where, again, working with stakeholders, MVP, minimal viable. Those words have to mean something in order for some of this to work. What is the least amount of functionality that we can build that is viable? And by that, I mean useful to someone. Doesn't have to solve all the problems for our users or for our market share, but it solves enough to where we know we can put this out in front of people and it will mean something to someone. The other side of this is releasing too early. You put something out there, like, I can't really do anything with this. The other end is, you build too much, but you build too much maybe in the dark because you didn't check in with your customers. These release iterations, again, they're opportunities for feedback, either at the sprint level or at the iteration release level. The sprint level with stakeholders, again, that release level with actual users. You deploy something to your users and you get feedback from them. Does this solve your problem? Yes or no? Does it solve your problem? But are there things that we can enhance, things we can make better, pain points we can try to mediate? And then you take that feedback back to the team, it populates a backlog, and then we prioritize what are the next big things we're going to work on? What are the meatiest things? What are the items in our backlog that solve the biggest problems in the least amount of time?
So let's talk about some of those best practices in order to make sure that we're getting at least that minimal value, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the key best practices teams should follow to truly get the most out of Agile? And what common mistakes do you see organizations make when trying to go Agile?
I think the biggest one is when an organization is trying to implement Agile, they just kind of dump it off on either the development team or IT. The rest of the organization, especially leadership, really needs to come along for the ride. And some of that manifests itself if they're not along for the ride, if the dev team is in the middle of a sprint or of a broader iteration cycle and a CEO just kind of walks in and says, hey, how about I sneak this in? I was talking to someone, or a salesperson sneaks in. I'm like, I was talking to a customer, and boy, and if we can get this feature in next week, tomorrow, or some other implausible deadline, I can close this deal. One of the ideas about these iteration cycles is they're not completely sacred, but the idea is to, we've agreed on 2 weeks worth of work for a sprint, kind of leave the sprint team alone so they can focus. Now, things happen. There are outages where, Production bugs happen and the team's work has to get interrupted. My point is trying to work with leadership of an organization to avoid the shiny thing that grabbed their attention yesterday at the expense of what stakeholders had previously agreed to as being important.
Interesting. Because I think going back to what we were talking about, the sprints, that could be sort of like a double-edged sword, right? Because let's say, to use your example about the shiny new toy, let's say that when you guys finish that sprint and you're showing off sort of where you are in the process, maybe that stakeholder sees us and says, "Ha, this is exactly what I wanted." And you guys are like, "Wait, whoa, 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 we're not done. This is just step one of 10. So we
Yes.
need to continue developing." So it sort of sounds like a double-edged sword where you guys might show some improvement right away, but then that stakeholder celebrates too early and thinks this is it. This is exactly what I wanted. And you're like, "No, no, no, wait, wait, wait. We're going to make it better. We just need more time."
It is a little bit. One thing I've learned is when it comes to defining, what's important, like in your example, we do a demo or we do a sprint or at the iteration level, and somebody gets excited, stop, you've solved the problem, we're done. And a product owner or the dev team says, oh, but we can make this so much better. My opinion, your opinion, a developer's opinion, while important, does not matter as much as the end user. What are our customers telling us?
True.
One of the kind of bumper sticker things, phrases for Agile, at least for me, is good enough. If you strive for perfection, that's a noble goal. But in software development, it can be a pitfall of diminishing marginal returns, going after perfection. When do we have a product good enough to release out into the wild and let people start using it?
Interesting. So moving to the implementation of Agile, when it's implemented effectively, what tangible benefits should organizations expect to see, both in terms of product outcomes and team dynamics?
Well, the key ones, and I've sound like a broken record, is getting stuff out to customers as quickly as possible. You can get something, it's the whole minimal viable product concept of we can get something to market quicker based on user research ahead of time when building out a backlog of features. We have an understanding, maybe an imperfect understanding, but we have an understanding of what we think a minimal viable product would be. So that allows us to define that MVP benchmark when something can be presented to a user base or a group of stakeholders, as opposed to, the more waterfall approach where you have a longer backlog where you look at it like, well, this is where I want to be, which is great. But sometimes where you want to be with a really long feature set could be defined in months or years, where we can get something out much sooner than that. And to that point, if it's usable, get people to pay for it. Money. You can start making money sooner.
That's obviously
that's a key metric right there.
Yeah, it's that's what I was going to say. It's the metric. At the end of the day, that's exactly what we all want, is to make money to some degree when we're reviewing these processes, and to make sure that we're actually doing the right thing for the organization. That's why we bring in teams like you guys to make sure that the processes are in place and that we can develop the software, in the case of software development, to the point where it can be deployed and actually be usable, like you said, for the end user.
Yeah. You'd also asked about kind of pitfalls to avoid, just even at the team level, not even with the stakeholder level. Part of the Scrum cycle is at the end of the 2 weeks, as mentioned, is showing off, demonstrating what you have to get feedback, to make sure we're on the right track. But at the end of that 2 week cycle or that sprint cycle is also an opportunity for a Scrum team to reflect. What went well? What didn't go well? How can we as a team, and team, I mean developers, designers, UX folks, the product owner, product manager, testers, QA folks, what can they do? And it's usually almost always an internal, a family discussion. No one from management sticking their head in like, are they talking about me? No, it's just inside the team, so the team can have an airing of grievances like Festivus and try to solve their problems internally as much as they can. And then if not, then a Scrum Master can help out. Scrum Master is kind of the train engineer of a dev team that keep the trains running on time, can help mitigate those problems through kind of helping run that it's called a retrospective, sprint retro, that retrospective meeting, and fostering discussion with the members of the team to address those issues so they don't fester. And also identifying what went right. Hey, if something went right, let's keep doing it.
So can I take you a little bit off topic here? Maybe not so much off topic, but you mentioned product owner, scrum master. For our listeners, could you describe a little bit more about what a team in an agile setting might look like and what those different positions might be called and what they would be responsible? Sort of like what you were saying about the scrum master being sort of like the train engineer.
Sure. Broad strokes here. A product manager is usually in charge of the vision of a product, defining the backlog. And by backlog, I mean the list of pieces of functionality that need to be built in order to make a project or a piece of software work. A product owner, and sometimes there's often a lot of overlap between a product manager and a product owner. Product owner is usually a little more tactical, where the PM product manager is a little more at the strategic level, but a product owner is usually working more at the requirements level for those backlog items, working with stakeholders, working with the product manager, working with the dev team to take those backlog items, those desired features, and adding requirements. What will it take to make this thing work? Kind of the boilerplate language is, as a user, I want to do a thing so that I can do X. So let's use the example of lighting up a room. It's not a software problem, it's just a problem. When I walk into a room, I want to flip on a light switch. So when I walk in the room, I can see light and read a book. That would be on what we call a user story, which is just a work item in the backlog. The developers in the team that are front end doing the UI, the part of the software that you see in the screen, the back end, the database, the kind of the business rule or functionality that you don't see that makes the magic happen. Developers build that out based on what's in those user stories. They try to fulfill those requirements that have been defined by the product manager and the product owner. Once they have completed their development, it typically goes to a QA tester where they say, hey, does this work? And it's more of the developers test their own stuff, but it's kind of an objective party, to someone else to say, hey, that's not quite working as we need. Take another pass at it, please. And product owner or product manager may take a pass at testing as well to make sure a particular feature meets their requirements, their understanding of how something works. And then the Scrum Master, as I mentioned before, is kind of the train engineer. They are servant leader. They're really there to remove roadblocks that the team may have, keep meetings running on time, make sure the meetings happen, more than anything.
That's very important. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the developers are developing, the product folk are doing their stuff. The Scrum Masters are really to kind of prop up and make sure the team functions as they should.
Thank you for that. So agile transformation isn't just a team effort, as you were discussing. So obviously we have a team, but it's not just them. It really often requires cultural and structural change within an organization. So how does transformation differ at the individual, team, and organizational levels with agile?
Well, at the individual level, I think the big thing is understanding if you're a part of a Scrum team, there are different roles. People have different responsibilities, but no one's really in charge. No one's the boss of a Scrum team. Nobody runs the Scrum team. They run themselves. They're kind of it's very democratic, and that prevents, a product manager or a product owner from coming in and trying to say, we're going to do things this way. No, a developer has every right to say, I get what you want, but they have an equal voice in that conversation. It's not just a top-down thing within the Scrum team. So recognizing that you are an equal part of a broader effort within the context of a Scrum team for Agile. At the team level, as I mentioned, there may be different roles, but there's no leadership specifically, and no one's in charge, but there are the different roles, and being able to collaborate with a UX person, a designer, product, and knowing that you can collaborate with them, but still staying within your lane. So it's not that a QA tester or developer can't offer feedback on a design. They should, especially, a developer where they may say, well, that's a nice design, but I don't think we can build that with the technology we have. Those are the kind of team level collaborations that are important. And at the organizational level, I mentioned it before, top-down adoption is key, because if the leadership is trying to slide in features, outside of the sprint planning or backlog review process, that can be undermining.
Yeah.
If they're really, I don't want to say not paying attention, but if they don't have an awareness of how the sprint cycles and the development cycles work, they may get 3 months into a development project and say, well, that doesn't look like what we talked about 3 months ago. Well, it's not, because remember, we iterate and we've learned. So we've
Yeah.
had to pivot based on what we've learned in sprint demos, in iterations. When we've shown this to actual users or user groups, and we've received some feedback and we've made changes accordingly. So you're right, Mr. or Miss CEO. This does not look like what we thought it was going to look like 3 months ago. It has changed significantly.
Yeah, I see how every level differs from each other. I live by my self-proclaimed belief that anything that you're trying to do needs to have that top level buy-in. Otherwise, it's not going to succeed at any level. It doesn't matter how hard you try. It doesn't matter how much effort you put into it. People follow their leaders, and
Yes.
especially in an organization where they've got CEO, CAO, et cetera, on down. If you don't got that first CEO buy-in, everything else crumbles underneath it. So I do see what you're saying about if the CEO is not involved, or they were involved maybe in that first iteration, and then the process is developed, let's say it's gone through 4 different sprints by now, and you guys have definitely matured and developed the process a little bit more. Maybe that CEO hadn't been paying attention through all that time. I show up to that meeting, you guys present all of that development over the last 4 different sprints. I'm thinking, wait, what the heck? What are you guys doing? This is not what we agreed upon. So, and that could definitely bring that crumbling down at that point, unless that person understands that, oh, okay, I get it. There's development, there's maturity in the process, there's change that obviously was going to happen, because as you said, you guys as a team are learning, are basically developing that process, that software, etc. And so you're going to exponentially change the program altogether from one sprint to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. But that iterative mindset, I mean, it's not just within the context of the sprint team. The C-suite can, should, and does use this as well.
Right.
What's the next big thing we're going to work? And I mean big. What's the next big boulder? They can define those at a broad level, even if it's just post-it note on a board, and then decide amongst the leadership team. We're gonna, out of these 10 big boulders, let's spend a week, a month, however long, a discrete period of time defining that problem to see if it's something we want to pursue as an organization. There's nothing wrong with that. It's rather than going through, just punching through a list, having that discrete period of time to allow people to come back and offer and review, offer feedback and solicit feedback, and pivot based on that feedback.
Yeah. And this segues actually very nicely to my next thought, or my next question to you, about leadership and really a cultural shift and the role that leaders play in supporting agile transformation, and how can they help foster a culture that truly embraces iterative improvement and collaboration. How do you see that happening?
One of the big things, I think, is shifting the mindset from kind of a command and control to servant leadership. Once an organization has broadly defined their goals, maybe defined a roadmap, and a roadmap is just a long-term look, broadly defined features that we want to accomplish in the future. Once that's been defined and the development team has their marching orders, rather than micromanaging or checking in every afternoon how things are going, it's having the servant leadership attitude of what do you need from me as the CIO or CEO or chief marketing officer or leadership of sales? What do you need from me to get your backlog finished or get your backlog issues working? Do you need feedback from customers? Do you need to talk to sales opportunities that didn't work out for us, or for like a win-loss analysis on a product to see,
Yeah.
kind of compare and contrast what we offer versus what other customers offer. It's more about support than, again, command and control at that point.
Yeah, I agree with the support part. As we were talking about, just making sure that you're involved in as much as you can in the process, and instead of sort of like what you were saying with the Scrum Master, not put any roadblocks, make sure that everything's smooth for the teams. And as you said earlier, that the team can actually focus on the work that they're supposed to be doing and not put any roadblocks. Again, I don't think I can mention that enough, because that's one of the important things that we should be doing as leaders.
Another part of it is this is going to sound very oxymoronic, but embracing failure. And I mean failing fast. And that goes back to the 2 week sprint concept where, if we're going to screw up, I'd rather find out after 2 weeks than 2 years,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
if we're on the wrong path.
Yeah, because
Just
that
for
could lead to a
leadership to
quick fix,
understand
right?
that can and will happen.
Yeah.
And you learn from it. You learn what not to do in the future,
Right.
either from a functional kind of development management back angle, or just finding out what your customers don't want.
And that could lead to obviously lessons learned right away and a quick fix that maybe if it happened down the line and we're not so much worried about it, it doesn't really revert back to a quick fix. It might become a bigger problem.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, I think the secret sauce of Agile is the iteration, both for
Mm.
the output and for management of the team within. If there are issues with the team, as I mentioned in that every 2 week sprint retrospective, let's get ahead of a problem now, while it's small, before it festers and blows up, and then if people are yelling at each other.
Yeah. All right. So before we go, as Agile continues to evolve with new frameworks like DevOps and SAFe, where do you see Agile heading next? And how can organizations stay adaptable in their approach?
I think you stay adaptable by understanding that, again, Agile is a mindset and a framework and not a punch list of activities. There's room for flexibility. I think I mentioned at the beginning, I think of Agile as setting up bumper rails. There are guidelines where you work. If you can function within those bumper rails, you've got a fair amount of freedom to adapt. And again, beat the dead horse of it. It's about adaptability after you've learned something. So if you find out that a certain particular niche aspect of Agile doesn't work for your team or your organization, well, maybe you don't hit as hard on that one. If daily stand-ups with your team, stand-up is just usually a very, very, very quick check-in with the team to see if they have any blockers. Many teams do that daily. If based on the nature of your work, or if you find out taking time away, we would really like to do this just 2 to 3 times a week. Adapt. There's no written rule that says you must have daily stand-ups. That's just as an example.
Yeah. Yeah. That's,
So I would say, how to answer your question, how does Agile evolve? It's by being evolvable, by staying adaptable and not being too rigid.
yeah, I was going to say, just when you were talking about the daily stand-up, sometimes those can become their own roadblocks. So it can become, maybe like you were saying, if time is of the essence, you may want to skip some of those, every so often a week, because you might want to hunker down and continue working. And
Absolutely.
sometimes those things can become roadblocks of their own to the team. But as a scrum master, as a product owner, product manager, you can remove those and basically let the people flow and continue working. And then you can maybe huddle together for 5-10 minutes and quickly, boom, let's go.
Yeah. It's usually a bit of an anti-pattern to have deadlines within Agile, because you're just, you're building towards
Right.
iterations and goals. But, we're in the business world. There are going to be deadlines. As much as you may have leadership on board with Agile, In Scrum, they're going to have deadlines. Everybody answers to someone. CEOs answer to boards, the boards answer to customers, etc. So everybody's going to want a deadline. You got a deadline coming up. Everything's on fire. Let's skip stand up today.
Yeah.
Adapt to the situation.
Yeah, exactly. All right. With that, we'd like to thank Jeff Coates for joining us today on Ask Anything. Thanks, Jeff. This has
Thank you.
been a
Appreciate the
nice
time.
conversation to have on Agile. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening in to this week's edition of Ask Anything presented by Moser Consulting. We hope you enjoyed listening to Jeff Coates talk to us about Agile and software development. Be sure to join us next time as we dive even deeper with our resident experts and what they're currently working on. Remember to share your ideas or topics with us through our social media. In the meantime, please give us a rating and subscribe to our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, so long, everybody.
Go